Making a video of my 73 Mustang Mach 1 that my father-in-law and I just converted to fuel injection. Sorry if this video seems really long and drawn out, but we ran into a lot of little issues that I want to share with everybody. So if you decide you want to do this, some of the problems you might face and little things that we did to fix the problems and save a bunch of money. This was a budget build. We try to keep the cost as low as possible. Doing this full fuel injection conversion, I have less than $2,000 into it. Mainly because I also didn't have to buy a donor vehicle. I already had a vehicle sitting here. What I ended up using is an old van, a 92 E350 van. Mainly because I wanted the Windsor. I didn't want to do the 302. The Windsor's a much stronger motor, and I wanted to use the Windsor. So what we did is we pulled the motor tranny and entire wiring harness out of the van. And what we did is we built an engine run stand, and what we were able to do is separate the motor and tranny, mount the motor to it, hook all the wiring to it, sensors, everything, fire the motor up sitting on the engine stand. And we essentially eliminated every wire that we did not need except for what we needed for the motor itself, and that's it. Because, you know, obviously you don't need the circuits for the headlights and blinkers and taillights and so on, because the vehicle already has all that. You just want the motor to run. The other problem I ran into, depending on what year, motor, make, and stuff like that you are going to be using, mine had a speed sensor because I had an E4OD transmission, which is all electronic. Well, since I don't have a speed sensor on this vehicle, I don't have nothing to communicate with the computer, which, you know, the computer won't be able to communicate with the transmission, telling the transmission when to shift. So obviously that became our first major hurdle. Well, after digging around on the internet, we come to find out vehicles from the years 84 to 92, Ford Crown Victorias, town cars, some of the F-150s, came with what they call an AOD transmission, which is an overdrive transmission that's non-electronic. It runs off a cable. The beauty of these transmissions is they came in vehicles that were carbureted and fuel injection. So if you have a carbureted vehicle and you're not going through this big process, but you want overdrive, it's essentially a direct replacement for your C4, C6, FMX. The only major thing that I had to do when I did it on this was the transmission cross member. I had to modify it just a little bit because of the oil pan's a little bit bigger on this transmission than the FMX that was in the car. Wasn't a big hurdle, but with a welder and a little bit of metal, we had it in there in about 45 minutes. Not a big deal. I also got lucky, my drive shafts worked too. The other beauty of using this transmission is your speedometer cable. The speedometer cable goes into the side of the transmission, same as your C4, C6, FMX. So you don't have to have an aftermarket gauge to run your speedometer cable because it's all non-electronic. So you don't have to have a speed sensor and electronic gauges and all that. You can keep your original speedometer gauge, try to keep your vehicle as original as possible. So that's something to look into. Like I said, you don't even have to do the fuel injection to do that modification. If you want overdrive, that's the way to go. Alright, the other problem I ran into was clearance issues, because since I used the truck motor, they come with this huge plenum, this upper plenum, which is really big, real tall. You can't close the hood unless you want to cut a hole in your hood, put a cowl, scoop. And I just bought this hood not too long ago from National Parts Depot, and I'm not cutting a hole in it. So I went to a junkyard and picked up the lower profile 302 upper plenum because I couldn't find one for a 5.8. They do make one for a 5.8. It's called a GT40, but with this being a budget build, those things are kind of hard to come by and they're kind of expensive. So well, you decided to go this way. Well, then we found out that these do not bolt to the lower intake manifold of the 351 Windsor. The ports are different and the bolt arrangement's different. So with a little more searching online, we found a company called BC Broncos. They sell an adapter plate. Let's see if I can get a view of it here. See the little Allen screw down there? That plate right there with the Allen screw? What that does is that bolts right to your lower intake manifold, and it allows you to bolt the stock 302 upper plenum right to it with no modifications. It realigns the ports and everything. It literally just, it's like a bolt on and play. The only problem you'll run into is the EGR valve. You have to eliminate your EGR valve. Unless you can find a way to rerun it, but we really didn't find a way, because on the 302, the EGR would run through the intake manifold through a hole in the center that the Windsors do not have. It'd come through, there's two holes here. One's an in, one's an out. And that's how it would cycle the EGR. And it had a vacuum line and electrical. On the Windsor, the truck motors, when they have these big plenums, these only had, you see it only has one hole. And what happened was the front of the exhaust manifold had a tube that came up to the EGR valve, and it ran essentially directly off the exhaust gases, right off the exhaust manifold, instead of going through the intake manifold. So it only has one hole, and so it won't cycle properly. But you can't just cut it off and pretend it didn't exist, because what will happen is your RPMs will fluctuate between 300 and 400 RPM. And depending on what your RPM is set up on your vehicle, you put it in gear, it'll about stall it out. So what you gotta do is you gotta go on eBay. There's little things right here. It's like a little diode, little resistor thing that plugs right into the factory plug for the EGR valve. It tricks the computer, making the computer think that the EGR valve is still there. Now, every once in a while, it still will fluctuate just a little bit, but it's within 100, so it's really not no big deal. But what's happening is the computer goes into what they call search mode. The computer, what happens is it is searching for the EGR valve, and since it can't find it, it's taken the throttle positioning sensor and the air idle control valve, and it's causing those to try to readjust themselves, trying to find it, essentially find its happy place. Now eventually it will smooth out, but then it'll come back and start doing it again. It's a cycle. It'll continue to do that until it finds that EGR valve. That's where you have to put a resistor in there. It's a real cheap, inexpensive part, but it fixes that problem. The other problem we ran into, you might not run into this problem, but I did on my vehicle. On newer vehicles, the oil pans have a rear pickup, and the dipstick is on the driver's side near the rear of the block. On my car, I had to have a front pickup because of my cross member. My cross member on this car is non-removable. And the good thing is, on earlier vehicles, the dipstick actually was in the front of the timing chain cover. Like I said, with this kind of being a budget build, I wasn't going to buy an entire timing chain cover for a little hole. So we went ahead and just drilled our own hole and went to put it in there. And I just went to auto parts store, picked up an off-the-shelf dipstick tube, thinking it's going to work. Well, it doesn't. The problem I ran into is on earlier motors, that alternator is actually bolted to the very front of the cylinder heads. And then there's a little bracket on the dipstick that goes behind one of those bolts and puts the dipstick about in this area, right back in this area right here. Well, with the big brackets that they have for the serpentine system and the alternator being up higher, it won't go in there and you can't reach it. So luckily, since I ended up using the van, and the dipstick and the tube on a Ford van is like 5 feet long, I got lucky and I was actually able to cut that down, retweak it a little bit, and I was able to get it to go down in that hole in the front and come up where I have it. So if you run into that problem, just go to a junkyard, get a dipstick tube out of a van, and cut it down. Now what I had to do is, I know my pan is a 5-quart pan. So what I would do is I pour 3 quarts in there, stick my tube in there, I'd mark it where it was at, then I pour my full 5 in there, and then I mark it again. So that gives me an idea of where my full and my roughly 2-quart level is, so this way I can still check my oil. It wasn't a hard change, but it was one of those little pain in the butts. The other problem I ran into, you might not run into, but I did, is my throttle cable. I went to the junkyard, I bought 2 different cables. One was way too long and the other one was an inch too short, and the stock one for this car wouldn't work because it's throttle body and it won't hook up. So what I ended up having to do is, like I said, we're on a budget build. I didn't want to sit there and buy a cable. You can find companies online that'll make you cables. They get kind of pricey, they get kind of expensive. Now, what I did is I just took my gas pedal out, and the top of the pedal where the actual cable snaps into it, all I did is I just cut that, added a piece of flat plate in there, moved it back 1 inch, added some gussets for reinforcement, and modified my pedal. It didn't affect anything. It still works fine, but it saved me a ton of money from doing it that way. The other thing I wanted to show you is that cable I was talking about for the transmission. So I got right here. Here's the throttle cable. Right here, here's the transmission cable. Right here, here's let me get that way. This right here is the actual little adjustment. Now these cables, they have to be adjusted in the right spot for the transmission to work correctly. Now you can go online and you can find where people show you how to do just a primary adjustment on these things so you can make it work. But I do recommend taking it to a training shop. The main reason why, because if this is not working or off by a little bit and the transmission is not shifting like it's supposed to, eventually you will burn your transmission up. But you can do a primary adjustment just so you can get it to the training shop. The other stuff that I did, this wasn't really necessarily problems, but maybe more of like, I guess you can say advice, is a lot of the stuff that we used, like the overflow jug, the cooling fans, and the air filter, is out of vehicles out of junkyards. Like I got the overflow was out of a Nissan, the air filter was out of a Caravan. I forgot what I got the tube out of, but that's just a flex tube. And I got the front fans, I think, out of a Nissan as well. The reason I did it that way is I kept track of all the years and makes that I bought all this stuff out of. So instead of buying all this stuff, that's aftermarket, online, because when they start going bad and you got to fix them, if you can't find that same part again, now what do? You've modified stuff to fit certain ways, and now you can't find that part again. This way, all I got to do is go to a junkyard, say my overflow jug springs a leak, or whatever. All I got to do is go back to the junkyard or go to the parts store and say I need an overflow jug for an 87 Nissan. I think it was a Maxima I think I got it out of. I have it all written down. And I can buy it right off the shelf. It'll go right back into my hanger that I made, and I don't have to readjust and remake and do a bunch of stuff all over again. It's like a direct replacement. Same with the air filter. The air filter is out of a stock, I think it's a 97 Caravan. So if I decide if I need to get a new filter, or if I want to buy a K&N filter, all I gotta do is just go, Walmart or whatever, and just, look up air filters for that vehicle, and I can get the filter for it. I don't have to go online, track down the company I got it from, and figure all that stuff out all over again. It's all stock material. So it's mainly some advice, because I do have some aftermarket stuff on here, and if it goes bad, I have all the stuff written down, but then I gotta track it down again. And then, if I can't track it, if I can't find that same part, I'm gonna have to remodify things to make the new part fit. And that's just frustrations for down the road. But I'm gonna go ahead and fire it up. You can see it fired right up. What we did on this one, being an older vehicle, we don't have the pump that's actually inside the tank. We have an external pump, fuel pump, that's mounted right to the right to the side of the frame rail, and for the fuel. But it still kicks on and does everything like it would as if it was in the tank. But it's just external, and that's also a stock part out of a Ford truck. So I can just type it. I can just go anywhere and type in for a Ford truck and get that fuel pump all over again. I don't have to have some aftermarket thing I got to track down again. Just like I said, some word of advice. I've been driving around already a little bit. The transmission's working great. The motor's running great. I don't have any overheating issues. Here, sounds pretty good. Like I said, by using that transmission, I was able to keep all my original instrument clusters, like my speedometer, and obviously fuel gauge wouldn't change, but all the gauges I was able to keep stock, because I was able to use like that transmission. That was like pretty much a direct replacement. I don't know why this phone won't zoom in properly. It's acting funny. But I hope this video helps you out if you decide you want to do a project like this, and you want to try to do it on a budget. That's some of the stuff that we did. If you have any questions on anything that maybe I didn't talk about, just send me a comment and I'll do the best I can to answer for you. Thank you for watching.